Hello, everyone. I'm thrilled that we've got one of Australia's and certainly one of New South Wales' leading landscape architects with us this morning. I'm honoured for us to be able to speak to Jane Irwin. I've asked Jane to speak to us in particular about the Barangaroo project she worked on some years ago and where that got to and why it got to and some of the bigger concepts around that. I've spoken to Jane briefly about where we're sort of at within the studio, and we will have a bit of a Q&A and a bit of a discussion through some issues as they come up. Jane, how are you this morning? Thanks for giving us your time.
Fine, thank you. Pleasure to be with you. Thanks for asking me.
You are welcome. Jane, I think of your office as, I suppose, a small practice that whacks a great punch. And that's recognised, I noticed, in your 2020 list of awards from the Institute of various scales, civic, landscape, gardens, etc. We're very interested to talk to you about your experience with the Barangaroo project from its initial conception. In my mind, I feel like you won it and it was stolen from you by bigger processes. And I'm interested how you found that. And I'm asking this because it's a very comparable scale to the White Bays site, which our students are all working on right now, which sits in a highly speculative state with developers circling.
Well, it was a very interesting process. And I guess we are a small practice, so we don't kind of go for everything. We actually just, we try to do the projects that we know we can do and that are suitable for our scale. But really, we were part of a team. So Phil Thalis, a very good and sort of deep thinking architectural and urban design practice. We shared a big office with them, sort of a big studio office with a number of different practitioners, and Phil Thalis were one of those. So they were. We saw it come up, and we were very interested in it. And I thought it was exactly the sort of project that Philip should do, Philip Thalis of Phil Thalis, because he just has encyclopedic knowledge of the city, and he knows its history. He knows everything about the city. He's one of those people, sort of rather like Craig Burton, that just has this huge knowledge. And so we went in for the competition. I was very confident about it because it just seemed like our project. It just seemed like the sort of place that you could, our team's project, it just seemed the sort of place that our team could apply the principles that we work to and make something of that site. And Philip had sort of worked on that site before as well, or that part of the city for the City of Sydney, sort of doing some height studies and things like that. And so I really knew the background well. But it was a case of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. It was, we did win the project. We did win the competition. It was
so
clearly...
Now, Jane, that was a global competition?
Yes, it was a global competition. There are 134 entrants. So the first stage, we had a stage one and a stage two. So the first stage was really just putting the panels in, and then it was shortlisted to 5. So, you had to be very careful doing the panels not to have any hints that. Sorry, should I close the door?
No,
can you hear the noises?
Yeah, only a little bit. It's fine.
Okay. So we had, you had to be careful just to be. Thing with the competition is to be, I think, really clearly about what you're doing. I think really clearly about the principles and just portray the principles. And I thought that I think that all the way through, because of the way that Philip works and that we work alongside him, that was a very clear way to proceed. And I think it was very clear to the jury what the principles were and how that can be applied to the place.
Jane, can I dig into that a bit? So the principles that you're talking about and this idea of 5 panels, perhaps you could top line them a little.
Yes,
you can remember
I've got them here if you like.
Wonderful.
Would you like me to share that?
We would love that.
Okay, so just bear with me. It's a bit of a process here. I'll open them all.
What year was this, Jane?
This was 2005. I know it seems like ancient history to some students who were probably toddlers then, but
well, you know, and it's great to recognise what times things are done, and certainly in this studio we are giving focus to this idea of time and staging, and asking students to look out to not just 10, 20, 30 years, but 50, 100, 200, 500 if they can. It's a bit of a dare.
Yes, well, this is about time too. I mean, part of this was about time, because you look at a city, how it develops over time, and you kind of get this thing where people initially really fear change. And so one of the things that we always try to do is to actually look at what the site was, and what its different iterations were. Because when you look at things, we did a project years ago for Sydney Olympic Park, and dug into where it had come from, what it had been, you know, from its ancient past, and its Indigenous and Aboriginal heritage, through its iterations of being a farm, and then an abattoir, and this and that, the other. So, and it's really, when you take that to a client, they're often kind of like, oh, you can see how quickly things change. Like in 25 years, it's come from that to that. And you look at Sydney Olympic Park, in 25 years, in less than 20 years, 25 years, it's come from being an abattoir to, you know, an old abattoir grounds, to what it is now. And there's a lot of development and et cetera, et cetera. So this site is the same. In 1836, yes, it did have a headland here, and it was part of this sort of whole family of headlands. So Sydney Harbour.
Jane, yep. I wonder if your screen sharing is working. Sorry. Yeah, we see. What do we see? We see.
Why is that not?
I think perhaps a previous screen. I think you're drawing over an image that we're not quite seeing yet.
Yeah.
Panel 1. It's coming. Yeah, it's coming up just small on our screen. Can you enlarge it?
How weird. Can you see that? No.
We can see panel 1, but it's small and over to the right.
It's small. Oh, that's really strange. Hang on, I'll just see if I can.
There may be something you can do there quickly. If not, you can talk to that small.
Sorry. Yes. No, I'll just try and make that much bigger. Can you see that?
We can. It's a little bit bigger. It's not a lot bigger. It's not filling our screen.
Is that
not yet? It may be about to click in and take a bit of.
No, it doesn't seem to.
I wonder if I'm recording at this end. Jane, I'll tell you what I've done. I've just enlarged it on my screen with my wonderful fingers, and oops, it didn't like me doing that.
Well, I don't understand why it doesn't.
Here's Jan. Here's what we'll do. I'm going to enlarge with my fingers. So it's filling the recorded screen now. So if you talk to that image, we can see it well.
Okay, I just want this to work properly though, so you don't have to do that for each one of them, because it's just, I guess, because it's not just one PDF. Oh, I don't know. Anyway.
Step ahead, I say. Don't let it rattle you. Let's carry on. I'm going to just make it bigger. Jane, talk to us about the principles.
Can you actually, hang on, I see what I need to do. I think I need to go back and go share that. I stop sharing and I'll just open the share tray. Yes, here we go.
Brilliant.
I just have to, I just have to do this for each one. So maybe that would be really boring. So I'll just do a few.
Okay.
I'm sorry I didn't put this together as a PDF, but I just didn't have enough.
Jane, it's terrific to have your time. I'm very aware, you know, the kind of role you play in thinking about the city.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll go back to this and just talk about, you know, the harbour as a it's a kind of rhythm of headlands, and you can see there's all of these headlands and little islands that sort of poke into the harbour and really define that movement through the harbour. And the headland here, what we know as the Barangaroo headland, had been part of that, and we can just see for part of that there's sort of little outline of what that headland had been, but then over time it got filled in and became it became the wharves through there, and the wharves went through a lot of different iterations. They had been filled in gradually, so it actually started as a series of really sort of jetties and wharves with water between, and as time went, it got filled in, and then as time went further, that it just became one big concrete platform. And there were a couple of there were some very strong remnants of the past there, and one of them was this a sandstone sort of cliff where the headland had really been cut off, and it was one of those things you see all through Sydney. You see it at Woolloomooloo, where the staircases come up from Woolloomooloo up to Potts Point, and where there've been these really decisive cuts made through the stone, and the sandstone is one of those things that really defines Sydney. So we did want to keep some of those remnants. There was also some remnant sea walls in here, and there was one little remnant pump house building. And there was also the maritime building right on the headland there that had been moved from somewhere else. And so what we wanted to do, though, was to try to, and the reason it's sort of presented like this is to just really tie the site back into the city, because it is a sort of an outpost. It's difficult to get to. There's just this one, well, you can't even really go through that way. Most people come in through Darling Harbour, and it's this windy way to go. But what we were trying to do is to tie it back to Millers Point, and tie it back to Millers Point here at the headland as well, with a series of sort of streets and bridges. And then you can see also, that Sydney is made up of this grid, which deflects in some areas. And then that grid very importantly gives address to all of the buildings. It makes the site really permeable. And importantly here, what we wanted to do was to ensure that all of the public streets had a very clear view through this way, through to the water, because we thought that the public view is really much more important than the private view. Excuse me, I'm just going to sneeze.
Bless you.
Oh, thank you.
As they say.
So the most important thing about this is, though, you can see this big green wedge here, and this was then constituted a public street, which is very much the same as sort of these edge streets you get at Macquarie Street, edge streets you get around the park. What a street and the park does is ensures that this bit's public, this bit's private, and it sets up a very it's a very clear message that that's what's happening. I'll see if I can get the other ones up. I think I've just got to stop and start the share. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Jane, that's a wonderful quick
You can edit.
Yeah, sure. Well, no, it's even better than that. Clever students and tutors speed us up. They play us on 2 or 1.5. So it's all good. If you understand what I mean.
Yes.
So it's fine. People can just play us a little faster. Jane, it's wonderful to hear you talk about that public versus private, and how you're able to realise that into a built form.
Yes, well, I think it's actually sort of less about the built form, I guess, than an urban form. You can see that. So this is really just shows you all of those principles. So the biggest one here being that you have this very strong public domain. And I think that a lot of the work that Philip does and that we do with him in terms of urban projects is that the project is driven by the public domain rather than the other way around. So, what a lot of people don't understand is that, because we get told otherwise all the time, is that the city is about 40% public domain if you take streets and squares and parks factor all of those in. And so really that we own the city. I mean, we kind of get told all the time that the city belongs to the buildings and they let us use the spaces. And I've heard some developers talk like that, in that we own the city and we can make the decisions about it. But the city is at least 40%, and most suburbs are 40% at least public domain. So the point of the buildings is I guess, A, don't think about them as real estate, and B, that they're places for people to live and to work, and they have a duty in a way to form the public domain. So and to form and to inform the public domain in that they should be positioned so they don't overshadow all of the public domain spaces. They're not the leftover spaces. This is the point, is that they're not the leftover spaces that you get when the developers stop thinking about how much yield he can get, or how much, what the best views and etc. can, what can this building do. So there's another different way of thinking in that the public domain has the best views and the public domain has the best access to the water, because this space belongs to you and me and everybody else. This is the democratic space of the city, as Philip would say. So this is the sort of space that you should be able to go anytime, anywhere, and anyhow. It shouldn't need to be activated by endless cafes and sort of things to amuse merchant bankers. It's really, you need to be able to go here if you're a snotty-nosed kid on his push bike, and not be chased away. You should be able to go there and sit there and breastfeed anywhere you like, or to do whatever you like in there, because it's your space and my space. It shouldn't be dictated by the owners of the buildings. Anyway, on and on and on. So I noticed that when we did go there to have a look here and we were taking photographs, we were kind of chased away, because and there are photographs, you see photographs now around the rocks where it says, do not take photographs here. And it's the public domain. I should be able to take photographs. And there was an early there were some very early controversies about how this space was eventually managed in that way, because I think that the thing was
Jane, you're talking about the current site as it is now, or are you talking about
the current site? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. No, well, we were allowed to go. Sorry.
Yeah, you've been chased away sort of now, you mean?
Years ago, yeah. Yeah, there's security
gates from memory, aren't there? There's gates. There's sort of open and closable gates, or a bollard or something around there.
I think there is at the top, because they want that as a rentable space so that they can rent it out at for fireworks and etc. There's not very much space up there that's actually usable. Sorry, I'm pointing to this, but this is actually our scheme, not that scheme.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll go through this. I'll stop rabbiting on about.
It's super interesting, Jane. You're not rabbiting at all.
But my socialist view of the world. So this we actually then looked at. This is sort of explains the thinking around the thing, and you can see it was sort of building types, public and community buildings. So it was very clear that we wanted there to be a series of community buildings and public buildings too. I don't think those have happened yet. Really, because any part of the city should have that. It should be the private buildings should be punctuated by the, with the public buildings as well. And you can see in here we actually had a few of those that were built into the Headland Park. Some heritage interpretation, water management. We had a very ambitious scheme that all of the water from here would be managed through the landscape of the headland and the park. There was some things here. You can see that we actually kept the form of the old wharf and then overlaid the form of the sort of 1836 headland. And I'll go into that in a minute. But the most important things here were this, public domain as a series of distinctive parks and integrating with the city, so that all of these were how you take the streets down, and you can see that the streets are very clearly sort of then go straight from urban to the water. Let's see what else we've got here. Sorry.
Jane, just looking, I'm not surprised you won.
Well,
I'm appalled that it was robbed from you, but I'm not surprised you won. Looks like a terrific response.
And then I'll just show you this one. As well. Oh, where have you gone? Sorry, this is very clunky, but
that's all right.
So this was part of this is the only part of the strategy that's actually remained, which is interesting, in that what we had was we had a number of people that worked with us on this. We had Tony Caro. We invited sort of 5 architects to just submit a little building for it, because we said that that area should be the work of many hands. It should be, it should have that diversity. And so those have actually, that's actually eventuated. Tony Caro, DBJ, Collins and Turner have all contributed buildings to it. And I think that different scale of building and the different purposes of those buildings and the different hand has actually contributed something there, because otherwise what you get is sort of it's just those huge buffy buildings that really just dominate the skyline and dominate dominate at ground level as well. I think that part of the city is that it part of the character of the greater city is it does maintain some smaller buildings that then add a diversity of scales, and I think that that's really important. Okay, I'll go to I'll just see what else we've got here. I've been through the principles with you. What I really wanted to do was just to show you then in the second stage, so in the second stage, what we did was started to look at things in a little bit more detail. This was the second.
Jane, just to talk through that process, you won the global competition first round, and then what happened next in the big world?
What happened next is that we had to go to the second stage, which then I think it was, I don't know if it was, I'm getting my stages mixed up here. Anyway, stage 2 Stage one, I think I just showed you the stage 2 panels, but stage 1 was actually just a very, just an idea of it. It was sort of, I guess, more like an EIS, but stage 2 then developed some of these ideas. And there were 5 schemes in that. Lend-Lease had 2 entries in that. They had 5 entries in the whole competition, but they had 2 in that one. One of those was the Richard Rogers scheme, which was, I think, in stage 1, even then, it was kind of a favourite of Paul Keating's. There was a little bit of controversy in the second stage in that the Rogers scheme panels actually showed a lot of their buildings in the as precedents, and it was kind of clear that it was their
showcase.
Yeah. Oh no, that was in the stage 1. Stage 2, we actually then presented to a jury. There were a lot there. Yes, I won't say who the jury was. Actually, one of the people on the jury was Jack Mundy, which was interesting. I don't know if your students know who Jack Mundy is, but they should.
They absolutely should. Do you want to give us the top line?
Oh,
look, Jack. In short, Jack Mundy saved the rocks.
Yeah, Jack Mundy saved the rocks. He's actually one of my all-time heroes, favourite people. He was actually a union leader who led a series of union bans when there had been a brilliant scheme, which you can still see if you go down to the old Schiffer offices. There's a model of it to raise the rocks and put sort of one massive high-rise development on a podium over the whole of the rocks. So he was very interested in heritage and also in, I guess, in heritage and he's sort of early environmental crusader. I think he could see, the value of green areas as well. So his movement sort of helped to protect those as well. So he instigated a whole movement of what they call green bans, and that really just meant that the unions would just really basically the construction industry would just down tools and nothing would happen, to save these things. And I think that's why the government now still has a mortal fear of the power of the unions and 20 years trying to crush the unions. Anyway, it was a great thing. It saved the rocks, and also some really important sites in Hunters Hill and some parklands and some sites on the periphery. And what that did as well is that it actually sort of was the instigation of the Heritage Council as well, and it started a movement towards recognising heritage as an essential part of the city. Yeah.
And so, Jane, you've sat on the Heritage Council for many years.
Yeah, 5 years I did.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Just putting things in context.
That's okay. Yes, but Paul Keating and Chris Johnson were also on the committee, on the jury. Helen Lockhead. Look, I can't remember everybody. I'm sorry, but the jury came out 6-4 and 3 on the fence, sort of thing. So it was supposed to be unanimous, and so Paul Keating agreed. The 3 that were divergent, which was Paul Keating and Chris Johnson.
Jane, sorry to cut in. I'm very aware half of our 70 students are Chinese, and many are in China. And Paul Keating is one of our former prime ministers, who sat on the left side of politics, and he was a terrific prime minister in the early 90s.
Yes.
Sorry.
And so so that then so that there were a series of sort of conditions put on. So it's like a conditional win. But then really after that, I guess really we weren't the answer that they wanted. I think that part of that was really was that they would have preferred to have a big name. And I think Richard Rogers was the name that they wanted. And they were sort of officially the runner-up. And I know that they had expected to win because Martha Schwartz flew over from America and was ready to, kind of get the accolades. And I think Richard Rogers wasn't here, but he'd sent somebody to collect the winning, or to represent Rogers. And Martha didn't come out of her room. She just went straight back, got on the airport and went home. Got on the plane and went home. So yes.
Yeah. It's a big game. It's a big game.
Yes, I know. And I had been out on a site visit that morning, so I was in my jeans and my boots. And anyway, it was quite the event. It was really good. But it was good to present to the jury as well, because that actually just makes you really clarify, what the points are. Anyway, so to go on, this was actually how it was conceived. The parklands here, the Headland Park, and one of the criticisms was that there wasn't a headland park, but there was always very clearly a headland park, and it was based on preserving some of the historic seawalls and wharves, and on preserving sort of the pattern of the wharves as it had developed. So so there was to be a headland park, and this didn't connect up to Millers Point up here, because it seemed that the buildings at Millers Point had been built long after the headland had disappeared, and these little buildings. All of this was actually social housing or protected tenancies, protected housing. And I remember going up there just after the competition and thinking, wow, these are not going to last very long, because of the pressure of this all this high-end development sort of pushing against this protected tenancies, and then this having even more value. If this park was brought up, I thought that this is just going to pressure this in terms of, Sydney house prices. Anyway, so this was the idea of the Sydney proof development, which was to make all of this.
So this is stage 2 now, Jane?
This is then after stage 2, where we started to develop the scheme. So we were asked to develop the scheme, and as the winners. So this was part of what
and I can see you're responding to the jury's comments. You've cut things
That's
away.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So responding to the jury's comments, one of which was to not have this, shape of the, and I couldn't understand really Keating's take on it, in that it was really, this whole area was really kind of the start of the union movement, even in Sydney, because the street that was down through here was known as the Hungry Mile, and that was actually a site of sort of protest from the dock workers when, I can't remember when it was, but it was really about sort of work conditions and not having work and et cetera. And it's where people used to come and wait also to get jobs on the wharves. And so a lot of this was very, it's really important to the history of the city. And then you've got the wool stores that are in here, and up here is the pub, and I noticed when I went back a little while ago that that part of the planting that's been done for this has actually, it kind of, I guess there's this balance between what you keep of social heritage and what you bring in of natural heritage, because now this area in through here has been quite heavily planted. Oh no, it's in through here, isn't it? That's the part that has been quite heavily planted with eucalypt trees and etc. And that's part of the idea that they had of turning this back into bushland. But what it's done is it's cut the area in half, so you can no longer see the wool stores and things like that. So that there's a disconnection then in the heritage. And I think about how that kind of works. Is that how we should move? Is that not? There's always two ways to do something, I guess. Anyway, so that was the parklands, and so maybe what we had done with this as well. I'll just show you these other two. Oh, no, I'll go back to here. Sorry. Here it is. Sorry. So we, oh, hang on. Oh, sorry. Sometimes I'm just really useless at this. Here we go. So this is a study that we did in the, after we'd won that, and it was looking, as I was saying, as this idea of the headland and as a family of headlands. And so we did a study of them in terms of their size and, comparing what we had in terms of our headland to all of these other headlands. And then we also did a little study of really of what was in each of these places. A lot of these places, like Bord's Head Reserve and Mrs. Macquarie's Point, Berry Island Reserve, they're still quite wild. And you can see there this Berry Island Reserve. So there was, I guess, in the scheme that eventuated, that's what they just concentrated on, that one aspect, that they just wanted to get that sort of original nature back and have it as a wilder place, which meant that you needed to put 25 metres of fill in there too, which is then how the car park has eventuated. What we had conceived this as of a much lower, something that was sort of up to 13 metres high, so that you could still see the wall at the back of that, the cut, the sandstone cut, but it meant that it was accessible, that it had some gentle paths coming up to it from both sides, something which it now doesn't have, unfortunately. And I think, and then underneath it, we saw that there would be, to activate the edge of it, there'd be a series of little, information booths and shops and etc. Because we accepted that it would be a man-made artifact, that you can't really put back the environment that was there before, because it's actually on a concrete slab. So this was just the research we did after. And this last one I'm just going to show you here is the comparison plan, so that you can see what, oh gosh, it's very small. Never mind, I'll be able to see it. So this is something that Philip did. Sorry, it's quite small. But you can see this is the scheme that was a competition winning scheme. This was a development on that. This is where we got to when we ended up, when we went into the next phase, sort of after the winning phase, we went into this phase, and this was sort of instigating some of the changes that that Paul Keating in particular wanted. And he wanted a much more natural headland always. And he did want us to sort of enlarge this little bit here so he could turn the Halverson round. And so, and really it started to really erode any notion of it having been part of the history of Sydney's wharves, which was unfortunate. So we tried to keep some of that in. So you can see this is then the development. And then this was, I think there's been sort of, I think there's been about 35, or no, maybe there's more than that. Maybe there's up to 80 changes to the planning document, or planning changes to allow this to get through. And I'm sure it's still happening. I can't imagine how many planning changes were needed to get the casino in there. So this is then, you can see then the public domain in the front is diminishing. The buildings are coming forward. The park's receding. Here again, the building's coming forward. And this, these parks down here have just kind of receded into nothing. That you do have this, but it's very separate and it's hard to get to. And then this was where we stopped in that comparison. But here you can see that the public domain has been reduced to a boardwalk, and which is what happens in all of those waterfront things. I think Philip said something about the buffheads hogging the waterfront, and it's a shame, but it still happens. And now this bit of parkland here has gone behind the casino to be forever overshadowed by an edifice of corporate greed.
Yeah,
I think that's what we've got there in that building. Is just it's a monument. It's a monument to the planning systems in Sydney and to the way we think about development. It's a monument to real estate. Anyway. But anyway, so that's just then saying if you did this now, if you continued this comparison from the competition winning scheme to this, then you would see that what we have is what we have everywhere else, which is a boardwalk. And so I think that's because the first thing to go was this road. People going, oh, it's so dangerous to have a road along the waterfront, and I think, well, it's not really. It actually just separates. And then all of the streets, you can see here that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, there's multiples of streets in there. And then in here, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And I think that they're even gone. And then there was this kind of very funny little thing that came up, which was that there was a Monopoly game, because people can get their own Monopoly game made called The Streets of Barangaroo, and I'm going, well, that'll be a very quick game. It's such free. Anyway, and what happened here as well was that what you see is that there's no kind of view along anymore, because the internal streets, any sort of internal streets here were removed. So what you get at the end of, so that there was this idea that you'd get a long view, and then that view is gone as well, because the buildings now just sit at the end of the north-south streets. So when you look back at Sydney and you look at Macquarie Street, George Street, and all of those, the beauty of those is that they actually, before the expressway went in, they all had a view to the water.
Yeah.
And so that's, how you think about the city, is that that's how you know that you're in Sydney. That was another very clear thing that we wanted to do, was we wanted to make it a part of Sydney. We didn't want it to be a part of Dubai or a part of this idea of the sort of international city. And you think, why people want to come to Sydney isn't because it looks like somewhere else, because there were all sorts of kind of odd things that happened as well, that in the, when we were developing the scheme, that Paul Keating came in one day with a picture of St. Petersburg and said, oh, look, there's beautiful canals in St. Petersburg. Why can't it be like this? And we're going, well, because it's pointless, in the first place to put, because a lot of people had said, oh, well, why don't we make it look like Venice, and you put canals in there. And it's sort of such an un-Sydney thing, to have canals. It's more like Southport or the Gold Coast to make it, or I guess there is one example here, but again, it's the example of how to build real estate. And a lot of those places don't work well because they don't flush properly. It's just not. It doesn't work very well. It works really well in Amsterdam in the new, well, not new now. It's sort of comparatively new when I went there. What's the name of it? The West 8 worked on it.
In the Netherlands.
Yeah. Outside, just on
Rotterdam.
No, it was, I can't remember now. I'll remember it in a minute. But anyway, some of that was actually that, they used the old canals or put some new canals in. But, it's a city of canals. It works that way, and that's how people get around. Yeah.
I'll have a look. See if I can find it. Yeah.
Borneo Sporenburg, it's called.
Yeah.
Anyway, but so that's really the story. I mean, then what happened really with that was that we couldn't please Paul Keating, no matter what we did. There were some things that Philip just really put his foot down. We investigated how you might make the buildings taller, and there was I think there's a very good episode of Utopia that talks about how you can improve the value of places, like making them taller. And
I have to say that rolls around my head quite often too. You can taller buildings, in a sort of Le Corbusier way. You save the land for
yes.
other scenarios. So there's always,
Yes, that's right. But I mean, in here they just got bigger and fatter and closer to the water all the time.
Yeah.
So, and even in after we had been dismissed, I guess. I mean, really what happened then was that there was just, the media came out, and even Elizabeth Farrelly came out and said, oh, this is such a boring scheme. And it does look boring there, and in comparison to sort of the Martha Schwartz scheme that had a lot of jelly beans in it, that it looks boring, but the thing about it is that a boring pattern of streets can just give you a really great framework. And then the buildings that you build within them are what makes the place exciting, and how you do the parks and et cetera. It's the people and the architecture that make it sort of exciting. But if you...
Jane, I don't think you should ever use the word boring again, because you diminish it. Highly responsive and site-specific might be a better way to mention those streets.
Yeah. Yes, but I think it is a very, very... what it did do was create a really strong framework, and I think that's a really important thing for anyone, is because you have to really, when you're thinking about a place like this, is think about how it's going to be developed as well. And we always had thought of it that it would be incrementally developed and staged. And what streets do is that they allow a really rational staging, and that when we've done some other projects where we've done streets first, the streets and the parkland get built first, and then that just sets the framework. You then can't keep taking the public domain away for a start. You don't give it to the developers for a second, and to maintain it in public ownership is really important, I think. So that's the end of that little presentation. So if you have some other, there was some things we talked about the other day about that you might want to. That you might want to
reflect. Jane, firstly, I wanted to say thank you for that presentation. It's enriching and terrific to hear it spoken about, and you're speaking of many themes, I suppose, that are already coming up within our studio. You know, I'm about to say something not relevant. Here's something not relevant for everyone. Jane and I had a quick conversation about haircuts before this started, and I was thinking how great Jane's hair looked, and she must have just had a haircut because on this day the hairdressers opened 4 days ago, and in this thought, it reminds me that my wife went and heard Julia Gillard interview Hillary Clinton. And I think they had a good old conversation with about 10,000 people watching about...
I heard that. I was there too.
About the amount of time they both had to spend in public life getting their hair done versus men. versus their male counterparts, I suppose. And perhaps that's a lead-in. You know, Jane, I think of you as a leading voice of landscape architecture in this country. And I think your initial win absolutely stamps you and recognises you as that. And I think of you as a leading female voice within the country, both landscape architecture and wider. You know, and we step into this world of public domain and these big projects like White Bays, like Barangaroo. You know, I was interested. There's a flyover project that's been released a few days ago by a conglomerate group called Architectus, and the images speak to many of the things you have brought up, a sort of a developer's delight, a little bit, and the potential erosion of the public domain. It's there in many ways, but I was a bit tweaked actually by the feedback loop on the social media that there are a lot of male voices chipping in. I have a question in here. Let's see. You know, I guess the role of women, in landscape architecture. You know.
Okay. Well, it's kind of a difficult one to answer really, because I've never, you know, it's a funny thing to say. Haven't thought of myself as a woman, but I haven't sort of felt I haven't sort of felt differentiated, and I haven't felt that I should differentiate myself in any way. I'm not going to say I'm not a feminist, because I definitely am, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. I think, you know, the backlash in the sort of 80s and 90s was that, like, oh gosh, you know, hairy-legged feminists must hate all men, but it's not really. I think I'm kind of a second wave, and I'm really very, very thankful sort of the first wave of feminists that really, you know, beat the drum. And those are people that are now, you know, people like Germaine Greer, who are now kind of vilified for this, that, and the other. And but it's also been some very strong, you know, female voices in landscape architecture in the world, and about, you know, urban planning as well, and understanding cities. There's, you know, Jane Jacobs, who wrote the definitive sort of understanding the city book, and of course, you know, Gertrude Jekyll, who was landscape architecture gardener, and our own. Gosh, look, I'm just forgetting everything as I go here. Sorry.
That's all right.
But I think that
I'm forgetting the name that I think you're talking about too.
Sorry, yes.
The 1920s sort of.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have her books here.
Same.
But
yeah.
But I think that's because I think, you know, in the beginning that people thought of, you know, women and gardening together, and that we should, you know, it's a nice. I remember being in when I was working in England, and one of the engineers saying something about, oh, you know, oh gosh, you know, must be, you don't sound like somebody who's, you know, moving rocks around. He said, I'm really looking forward to meeting you. And I said, well, you know, I'm actually 6'4" and I'm built like a brick outhouse. So anyway, but things like that. It was this idea that, you know, if you're a woman, you should really be kind of flouncing around in a frock with a straw hat. And but I think for me, it's always been that I hadn't ever defined myself like that. I guess I never thought that I couldn't do something. And I guess that I was, I grew up thinking that, and I was encouraged to think that when I was young, is that there's nothing I couldn't do because I was a woman, and this is what I wanted to do. So I just kept doing it, and still here, still doing it. And I've had a lot of, really, really great women working with me as well. And I've worked with really great women as well. I've worked with a lot of female architects. I've worked with Hannah Tribe and Virginia Kerridge, and again, they tend to be sort of smaller voices in urban design. But there's also been people, like Helen Lockhead, who have been sort of a force in urban design, in sort of guiding urban design thinking. So I think that there's actually sort of a growing voice, growing women's voice. But I also think that it's a difficult, our profession, it's so difficult to have family and to have and to do what we do, because the hours are long. I work 10 to 12 hours a day, most of the time, and I do it because to do what we do, I want to do it really well, and so that takes time. I'm probably really inefficient as well, but
you're not doing too bad.
But it does take time, and I've watched people like Rachel Neeson sort of struggle with the whole thing of family and balancing family and especially after Nick died with 2 small children, and it's a real struggle to have both, I think, and so I think that's one of the dilemmas of what we do, in that it's just one of those professions, like law or etc., that is quite demanding. And I think that that's one of the things that we just need to get around.
A wider social change of
that's right.
Men helping to look after kids, actually.
Yeah, but it's
so
also
that everyone can have a crack at things.
Yeah, and then it's also that sort of idea as well of being part of a construction industry, and it is a very male dominated industry, and I know when I first started, really felt it then, that you had to push twice as hard to be recognised or appreciated, or to have the guy on site. I've done a lot of work on site, and that's probably, I really enjoy it. I like going out doing site inspections and seeing how things are built, and I think that that's one of the things that separates me from some others, is that I still take that role. I still go to site, and I still make sure that things come together well. But then getting an understanding from the foreman, the foreman on site, and everybody's, most are male. Most people on site are male, and to get their respect, I guess, when I was younger, it was very difficult. So, but I think it's a little bit turned around now. I mean, men are on site are much more used to working with women.
Yeah. Do you think? Here's a speculative question. Do you think it would have been different if Julia Gillard instead of Paul Keating was heading that committee? You don't need to answer that, but it's an interesting play of a particular style of power and leadership, and where that has a massive impact on, as you say, the 40% public domain of cities.
Yes, I think that one of the things that I learned early on as well is that you can't ignore the politics of projects. Urban design is political, and you have to know about planning. You can't go in naively thinking that it's all about the environment or plants or making nice things. There's this much politics and planning in it, and then there's this much creativity in it, and you have to be able to understand that to be able to do that. And also, you know, thinking about then the things that are really important and the things that actually will last forever. It's interesting to walk around the city and have a look at the things that last forever. The streets generally last forever. The streets and the public spaces not last longer. Buildings come and go. So when you're looking at the thing with some people when they were looking at that competition was that they looked at the buildings, and we hadn't really paid much attention to the built form, because that was the thing that you plug in when you've got everything else right. And so, but we often think about it the other way around, you know, that the buildings dominate and you leave some space over there for the kids to play in the shade, you know, in the permanent muddy shade. So those are the things to get right, is to get all of the publicness right, and then you see how the buildings contribute to that as a piece of the city, not the other way around. You don't put the building in and try to frame a city around it.
Yep, terrific. Jane, last question. I know you need to go. It's wonderful talking with you. Certainly, I quickly mentioned this before, the last 6 weeks of this studio, we will foster this idea of regenerative design, and perhaps pick up on the SDG goals, some of them coming out in the last few years, and how they are able to influence those higher making decisions. And when we hold this idea that 60% of the world's biodiversity has become extinct in the last 40 years, so there's an urgency around that. And I guess, you know, holding everything you've said and that experience from Barangaroo, can you see things changing? Can you see things? I know exactly what you mean, what you said about the politics there and the environment. Do you think some of the biases and the weighting and the hierarchy do you see a shift out there? And are you involved in any regenerative design yourself?
Yeah, we're doing some projects in Canberra at the moment for a group called Molonglo, who've done some really great. They did the new Acton development Nishi down there, and which the building had a really high sustainability rating. But they're also now very interested. It's a site that's near the Jerrabomberra wetlands, so they're very interested in regenerative design. And have set some sort of standards and goals for that. So we're now trying to, you know, think about the site in terms of how the water moves and what the water brings to the site. And then you think about how you shape the buildings around that. And so it's really interesting to be thinking in that way. And they have a
so how the water moves first, and then how the buildings adapt around those.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, how you adapt the buildings to that as well. And then part of that is also to be thinking about how animals move through there, to be thinking about its non-human occupants, and they're very clear about that. And then also that they're very clear about using sort of indigenous species. So what we're doing is trying to go back to systems thinking about the landscape as a system and not as I think we talked about this the other day, not a spectacle. It's not an object. It's not a piece of art. You can do it artfully, but you need to, you know, thinking about it as part of a whole system is really interesting, and it's part of the way that the water moves, what the soil is, you know, where the wind comes from, how you keep water in the soil is one of our big things at the moment in terms of as a basis of thinking about its biodiversity, how you support life. And the soil and the water are the basis. The soil, the water, the sun are the basis for supporting life. So what we need to have is good soil. We need to have water in it. We need to have sunlight. We need to have air moving through, clean air, those sorts of things. So we're also thinking about how we use plants as filters. so that we can be creating healthy environments for everybody. So, and it's great because it's a really interesting journey, and I've just found that as I get older, I'm more attracted to the wild, I guess, and more kind of cognizant of I guess of where we come from, and as I say, going back to Indigenous landscapes and understanding those, and having having Aboriginal people to help guide us through their thinking about that world. So,
terrific, Jane. I could talk to you all day. I could, but you'll have many things to do. We've been an hour 15 minutes. I feel like we're over our hour, so to speak. Thank you, just a massive thank you from myself and all the students. Wonderful.
Interested to come and see the projects when they're done.
I will send you an invite for sure. Last day of November, first day of December.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to actually go into a room and look at them by then.
Yeah, well, I think they're all online.
Great.
And again, half our students are in China, so there's it'll be a format that we'll pin down over the next week.
Okay. Actually. All right.
But many thanks. It's terrific to hear your viewpoints and thoughts.
Okay.
Okay.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Bye all.